What's up, witches, and welcome to Salem, the weirdest place on earth. On today's episode, we are welcoming this guy right here. His name is Ron Martin. If you are not watching the video, I am holding up a book called Discover Salem, a tour guide for the Witch City. This came out in October, I believe, or September, recently, of 2020. It is a fantastic compendium for the new or returning Salem tourist, especially if you were checking out Salem around the October season. It is one of my preferred favorite Salem travel books. Highly recommend checking it out. But Ron actually does a lot more than that. He hosts a little podcast that I stumbled across back in March, April of 2020 on the Salem Witch Trials. And for that podcast, he does basically a day-by-day accounting of everything that led up to, included, and I imagine he's going to get into some post stuff on the Salem Witch Trials. It is, to my money, it's the most accurate representation of Salem Witch Trials that you're going to find in any podcast, my own included. So definitely check out that. Links are in the description for the book, for the podcast. We talk about all kinds of cool stuff today. This is really two Salem nerds kind of geeking out. We broach the subject of Halloween. We talk about what it's like to have such a commercial influence and if that dampens things or heightens them. It's a really, really cool conversation for someone who's been to Salem and is as enchanted with it as both of us are. It's a really cool conversation for someone who's interested in Salem Witch Trials, because I consider Ron to be somewhat of an expert at the Salem Witch Trials. It's a really great conversation if you are just interested in travel and tourism broadly, especially New England tourism. So I highly recommend this episode. It's fantastic, fantastic conversation. Do check it out. Enjoy now my conversation with Mr. Ron Martin. Welcome today, Mr. Ron Martin. He wrote this book right here, as you heard in the intro, Discover Salem, a tour guide for the Witch City. This is pretty new. What date did this actually release?
It would have been September 29th, so right before the Halloween season.
Right, and we're recording this. This won't come out until after Halloween, but we're recording this right up, what are we, a week away now from Halloween, something like that?
Yeah.
And I know that I've canceled my entire Salem trip. I announced that publicly on Twitter a couple days ago. And you had a trip coming up this year as well, right?
Yeah, I had a trip. I was going to be full moon Halloween in Salem. Then I scaled that back due to the unpleasantness of the world. And actually, originally, I was like, okay, I'll just stay a few days during the week when it won't be, as bad. And actually today, I was supposed to be driving back from Salem today, like
oh my God,
just hitting Ohio. So yeah, I canceled that because of the issues they've been having in Salem with tourism in October.
Yeah,
During a pandemic.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been following it this week at all or not, but they've effectively just told everyone not to bother. Just don't come this year.
Yeah. On the Discover Salem Facebook page, I've been keeping people updated on that as much as I can from here. Like I listened to the press conference, yesterday. Was it Wednesday? Maybe it was Wednesday. Where they put out the whole new rules for visiting Salem and how they were going to try to, kind of tamper. That's not the right word.
Tamp it down, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. I obviously, as someone with a kind of vested interest running to Salem, I've been watching this since April, really, trying to wait and see what they were going to do. And I made a video on the channel and was updating the site page where that video lived as new information was coming out. But we didn't really get firm answers to anything until like a week ago, which is kind of crazy. I'll be interested to see what Salem looks like in November, December, like how the residents are responding to this, because everything I'm seeing, man, is like people are in Salem are terrified and furious.
Sure. I mean, I would be too. It's the double-edged sword of, living in a tourist town, I suppose.
Yeah. So let's roll back a little bit. I want to talk about how you got to Salem, because we share something. We share a few things, actually. and I want to, if we can, try and figure out how and why we share those things. But
Okay.
we have these interesting connections between us where neither one of us live in Salem. You didn't grow up anywhere near Salem, right?
No, 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 no. I live in Indiana. I'm
Indiana.
1,000 miles away.
Is that where you grew up, Indiana?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. I've got family in Indiana. Actually, I've spent a good amount of time there. I grew up in the South, and so I didn't go to Salem till I was an adult. Same for you.
Yep, yep.
So, but both of us were exposed to it via the Crucible, I think. Is that true for
Yeah,
you as
yeah.
well?
Well, I mean, I'd always known about it, and it was always something I was excited to talk about, like in history class, which always amounted to like, I don't know, 4 sentences in a history book.
Right.
And then I really got introduced to it, yeah, through the Crucible. Yeah, I was cast in the school play of the Crucible.
As John Proctor, right?
No, I wish, John Proctor. We had some really good actors at my school. I went to a large school. I was Thomas Putnam.
Oh, cool. That's a great role. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. Which I just recently, in the last, I want to say in the last 5 years, found the grave of Thomas Putnam. It was unmarked in Danvers.
Oh, I've not been to that. I didn't know anything
Yeah,
about
it's a
that.
little cemetery. You have to pull up. You can't go into the cemetery because it's private property. But from the gate, you can see this large hill just inside the cemetery on like the left side, and that's where Thomas and Junior are all buried.
Wow. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. It's pretty surreal, honestly.
I bet a lot of that stuff out in Danvers is surreal. The nurse homestead is so surreal to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in Danvers. I think a lot of Salem tourists, if they're there for the witch trial stuff, kind of miss out on because it's 5 miles away, and there's not a trolley that goes there anymore. There used to be. The Salem historical tours used to have a trolley that went there, but I don't believe that they do anymore. That's why I tried to highlight it in my book, so if people were actually coming to Salem for witchcraft trial history, which is originally why I went to Salem, was for the witchcraft trial history, and kind of just fell in love with all the other aspects of Salem. Then they would know, hey, there's all this cool stuff in Danvers too. Let's take a day and do all that stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to get people out there because it's not very sexy either. Downtown Salem's very sexy with all the shops and
Yeah,
yeah.
sure. Sure, and literally like all these landmarks for the Salem witch trials, 1692 landmarks are like in the middle of neighborhoods. So it's not like, you don't have a cool witch shop and then, an ice cream shop and then some historic landmark for the witch trials. Here's the witch trial memorial, and directly across the street is a neighborhood. That's where the old church used to be,
Yeah.
But I'll tell you the foundation of the parsonage. Have you been there?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, that was like literally in somebody's backyard. But I would highly recommend that if you're into the studying the witch trials, because I got a really serene and like weird feeling there. Like it's very cool. I've been there several times.
It's strange. I've had a weird feeling at almost all of the Danvers spots that I've been to. There is something very strange about it. It's a shame. I don't know how you get people out there really, other than just tell them that it's out there. Because you're right.
Because you really can't take a walking tour out to Danvers.
Yeah.
All you can do is tell them. It's really cool though to go to that foundation, because you can walk down into the basement and be like, this is where it all started. This is where the girls heard the stories and got all possessed and feelings of guilt depending upon your belief of what actually happened.
Right. Yeah. So you're interested in Salem. You're in the Crucible in high school. At what point do you actually go for the first time?
When I finally have a job that will pay me to go on a vacation. So I'm like 26 years old. I finally have vacation days. I have a job. I'm like, wow, you're going to pay me to take time off? That's awesome. So I needed to take a week off, and I didn't know. I actually didn't really think of anywhere else. I'm like, I want to go to Salem, and this is the first time I went was about maybe a month after 9/11.
Wow.
So I was on a plane. Yeah, I was on a plane. It was I flew into Hartford, instead of Boston, because I had a friend who went with me, and she drove us up to Salem. But it was Salem itself was pretty much like it is now. I mean, well, 20 years ago, like it is now. I mean, there's only a handful of businesses that have been there since 2001. I'm sure you know that.
Yeah.
Because, like I said in the book, Salem, like Walt Disney World, will never be complete, and changes all the time.
All the time. I'm curious
Yeah.
to see what's going to look like, a year from now or so. Because
I mean, even since I've written the book, there's been new places that have opened up, and unfortunately, there probably will be places that close because of the pandemic. Like, since I've been there last, I know the theater's closed. I know that you went to a new witch shop that I've never experienced. That's brand
yeah,
so
brand new.
that's the last time I've been there. Yeah. So my first thing, like I mentioned in the book, the first thing I do when I get there, I just walk around town because it's to see what's different, what's changed.
Yeah, there's Beer Works closed. Did you hear about that one?
No, I love Beerworks, and the thing that sucks is I was really sad because when I finished the book, I left Beerworks out.
Ah,
I just
well,
completely spaced it, but I didn't know. I didn't know that it closed.
yeah, they had a weird. They closed pretty quick. They had a weird thing going on with their lease where, there's this new, and this may open up a larger conversation. There's this new hotel. It's like a Marriott, I think. Down, it's kind of down by the Broad Street and like sort of Broad Street Cemetery-ish area, like kind of
Hmm.
down a little bit
Hmm.
towards the canal, but the opposite direction from Pickering Wharf. I don't know what that neighborhood's called. Um, it's down around there, and um, that hotel chain has opened up like this that it's popping up so close to downtown. There's others who want in on that, and so the land that Beerworks was on, the leaseholders decided to. I don't know if they've officially given it to a hotel yet or not, but Beerworks was up for renewal, and they decided, since they were closed for COVID,
Uh-huh.
the leaseholders just decided they weren't going to renew it, and they were instead eyeing a hotel. So they didn't even shut down because of like good reasons, like they couldn't survive. They probably could have survived. It was just their lease owner decided.
Yeah, because they had a pretty robust restaurant business in there as well, right?
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
had that whole parking lot they could have put tables out on, I guess.
yeah. They
Had
could
that
have done
outside
it.
eating area for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know. I haven't read up on it since the story broke, so maybe something's different now. But as
Yeah,
of like
I had
April,
no idea of all the things I looked at that was never mentioned.
yeah, it's weird. It was a weird one. I think they were waiting for an excuse. That's the way it seemed to me. It was like they wanted to put the hotel there, and this was their
The
excuse.
landowners.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I mean, well, I guess in October, hotels are hard to come by. I guess better a hotel than like a McDonald's.
yeah, yeah. So you come in 2001. How soon is it after your first visit that you come back?
2002,
So
October.
is it very much like sort of a yearly thing since the first time you've come?
Yeah, yeah. I've missed 1 year in October since 2001. Well, not including this year. But then I made it up because I went twice a year, for a couple of years. I went in
Oh,
April
nice.
just to see what it was like, not October.
Uh-huh.
Two, because I had this idea for this book a long time ago, and I went in October, or I'm sorry, in April, just to get information and pictures and experience some hotels and things, which I have not been able to do in October because
Right.
the book's not doing well enough so I can afford $600 a night for a
It's
hotel.
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you have to pay what? Probably from Indiana, it's what, 3, 4 tanks of gas each way. Um,
Yeah, I get a rental car. Yeah, it's probably yeah, about 3 or 4 tanks of gas. Yeah.
yeah, then plus that hotel. I think that's something that when people who aren't, close to Salem ask about Salem Halloween, I'm always like, it's really fun, but it's really expensive. It adds up really quickly, especially if you're going to stay like in downtown Salem. I mean,
Yeah, that's why we always stay in Danvers.
yeah, Denver's is the way to go. We
Yeah,
we started doing Airbnbs in like Gloucester. Um, that's way more affordable too, and it's nice because the commuter rail runs through that whole Essex heritage region. So you can stay in any of those northern cities and then pop down for like $3.
Sure, the commuter rail is great. You have a great transportation system in Massachusetts. I was just looking at Airbnbs for the first time this year, especially for the trip I was supposed to be coming back from today. There was a really affordable Airbnb, this like literally like a block from Essex Street,
Oh wow.
which would have been like by far the closest I'd ever say like to the action.
Yeah.
But I've stayed at the Hawthorne, I've stayed at the Waterfront, I've stayed at the Salem Inn, I've stayed at the Morning Glory Bed and Breakfast.
What's your favorite hotel spot you've stayed at so far?
From the
It's hard, I know.
probably I'm not, the Hawthorne's great. All four of those I just mentioned are great. I'm gonna say the Salem Inn. Their rooms are really expensive, but every room's completely different.
Yeah.
Inside they have three buildings.
Yeah.
So inside the building that I was in, anyway, I will do what's the Corwin House. The night that I was there, there was no one else there because it was the middle of April.
Right.
So I had the run of this complete like mansion like house.
It's that yellow one, right?
What's that?
It's that big yellow. It's the yellow house by.
Yeah, right off of Essex Street. Yeah.
Right.
And it's very much like a living game of Clue, or that dark and scary night in the haunted mansion feel, because it's such a large. All those houses out there, all those federal style houses are so large, and being a person who lives in like a tiny ranch house, it's just a different experience. And they have complimentary sherry, so you can sit in the common room and sip your sherry and act like you're in some sort of Victorian age murder mystery.
Right.
So that appealed to me. So that's probably my favorite of the four, but it is the most expensive because each room is so different, and very large. The rooms are very large. I had a trip in May I was supposed to take that obviously got canceled as well, and I was going to try Hotel Salem and shoot, what's the name of the hotel that's in the Joshua Ward house now?
The Merchant.
The Merchant. And I was going to stay in the George Washington Suite in the Merchant. So I was really excited for that because I've also done amateur ghost hunting. So
Fascinating.
That would have been a really cool stay for me. But maybe next year, maybe 2021, maybe I'll definitely get in there at some point.
Yeah, that place is supposedly a few days from now. Was it tomorrow? Is tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow. The audio drama comes out, which has a little bit to do with that spot of land.
Absolutely.
So that place is supposedly. I've never stayed in the Merchant. I've never even been inside the Merchant. Although
I haven't either.
Yeah.
I've been on the ground several times. They used to have the tours back in the early 2000s where you could go behind the building and you could kind of walk around the area. You couldn't go into the gate or into the building. Now they can't even do that. Obviously, they just stand across the street. Tours, I believe. But I'd love to go inside of it. I've seen pictures from inside. The famous ghost lady from the 70s picture. That's a pretty cool picture.
That's a good one. It's not the most haunted. I think people say the Hawthorne is the most haunted in terms of sheer like volume and variety. But it definitely the stories you read from the Merchant are terrifying to me.
Doesn't that have like the seal of the Travel Channel, having named it one of the most haunted places in America?
I think so, yeah.
Whenever the ghost hunters shows come to Salem, they never go there. It's always foreign.
It's always the Witch House. They do the Witch House or Hawthorne.
The Witch House, yeah.
Zach Baggins, I think, did the Witch House when he was there.
Yeah.
Which I've never, to be honest with you, I've had two paranormal experiences in my life, one of which was in Salem. And it was at the Hotel Salem. And it was at the Hotel Salem literally maybe 2-3 weeks after it opened. I mean, it was
so pretty recently, huh? So it has to be in the last 3 years. Yeah,
it was last Halloween? I think it was. No, it was the Halloween before last. The Halloween before last, it had just opened, and we decided to stay there, my wife and I, because it was new and we wanted to check it out. And literally like it was unfinished. It was so newly open. There were still like
Sure,
spots in the
sure.
room where drywall wasn't painted and stuff like that. And um, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. Everything was shut down. As you know, even on a normal year these days, Salem pretty much shuts down on Halloween night at like 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, they push everybody to the commuter rail by 11, right?
Yeah. So it was well past that. My favorite experience around Halloween in Salem, well, not my favorite, but among my favorite, is I love going out and walking well after the crowds are gone, like midnight, 1 a.m., stuff like that. I love just being in the environment in sort of the post celebration haze. And then the next morning, the morning of November 1st, is like my favorite morning. Honestly, this year when I decided I wasn't going to go, it was the thing that I was immediately like, God, I don't get to do November 1st now, because there's something about sitting in like the Red Line Cafe or Gulu Gulu, any of these coffee shops or breakfast places where you can see out onto Essex Street. There's something about looking out at Essex Street on November 1st. There's pamphlets kind of on the street. There's like
Sure.
confetti. There's the trash cans are a little bit overflowing. The crews are starting to clean it up. There's just something so, I don't know what it is. There's such a sense of like discord or something. And you see the residents of Salem starting to emerge and walk around, and they're like
From hiding.
happy. Yeah, from hiding. They're like glad that they get their city back. And there's just something about that morning that I really, really love. Anyway, so it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and my wife had fallen asleep, and I was like, I have trouble sleeping all the time. So I was sitting up, flipping through a book that I had gotten, and I was thinking about going for a walk. And as I'm sitting there, the shower door, which the room we were in, it didn't really have a bathroom door. It was just an open entryway. And so you could see straight into the shower. The shower door just like creaked open. And I instantly felt this, the feeling if you've done amateur ghost hunting. I instantly had that feeling, which is so hard to describe, but it was just this like, oh God, this is it. Like, oh God, this is it. This is real. This is happening. And so that sense of like not being alone, that sense of something not being right, of like dread and like, oh, I'm out of control in this moment. I don't know what's about to happen. That whole thing washes over me. And I watch as the shower door stops like halfway through opening and shuts again, but doesn't shut all the way, and then opens back up. And I'm just like staring at it. And in my head, I just like admit it to myself. I'm just like, this is a ghost. Like there's something weird going on here. And when that happens, there's like 3 knocks on the wall behind where my wife is sleeping. Very, not like, boom, boom, boom knocks, more just like letting someone know. That's how it was like a quick rapping, like sort of a non-violent, not threatening, just like a pop, pop, pop. And
Yeah, most of them aren't threatening.
Yeah, it wasn't that way at all. And I took it to mean like that, whatever it was just like saying, yeah, I'm here. This is cool. It's cool.
Well, that area was under construction for like 2 years, right? So we know that changing things around construction process really brings out the spirits, and sometimes, most of the time, they're not really down with it because they won't, they like things how they were, how they remember them. So it could have just been that the ghost had experienced was just kind of checking out the new threads, so to speak, and experimenting with the new area that they had to work with. That's a weird location, though. I don't know of anything that's happened there. That had where the Hotel Salem's at. I mean, obviously, it had a history of a ton of different shops and things that were in the corner. Like every single year I would go to Salem, that'd be a different shop. Everything from a costume shop to a witch shop to a Lizzie Borden museum, which is one of the impetuses for me writing that book. People should have warned people not to go into that place. So if I'd had the book then, I'd been like, don't go in here. Don't waste your $15.
Yeah, there's a few places like that still.
Yeah. Is part of the reasons why I wrote the book.
Yeah. So let's jump back to the book a little bit. You said that the read
Well,
was
before we do that, can I just say that in Salem, literally you can experience a ghost anywhere in town. I've had some. I wrote about it in the book as well. Uh, Anywhere in town that no one ever talks about, you might have an experience. That's what's great. That's one of the great things about Salem.
where have you had it? Where have you had experiences in Salem?
Well, I did write a chapter about it in the book called Ghosts of Salem, but I've had experiences near the old town hall. Really weird. I got a really great, and I wish I had it. I could show you. It's on my old laptop. I got a really great ghost picture from that. Just snapping a picture of what I thought was cool. You know, it's all brick there. It's very ambient. I was there one night and there was no one else around. I was like, oh, this is not going to happen again. Let me get a photo. Then all of a sudden, there's this ghost lady like in my face. I snapped a picture like literally 1 second later, the same thing to see if I could follow it, and it was gone. And then I've actually had an experience in the actual basement where the witch dungeon was at. So
Oh wow.
that was very cool. Before the, I guess it's the there's a tour that goes through there now. Something 1692 tour.
Mm-hmm.
In prison 1692 tour, which is spoiler alert on the book. I recommend the tour just because you get to go into the basement and the where the victims of the Salem Witch Trials were held. This terrible location. There's a lot of bad energy there. But before that, it was just a big wide open basement space. I don't know if you remember the Spellbound Museum.
I don't think so.
Probably about 2000, from like till about 2010. It's a paranormal museum that had witch boards and a voodoo room and a witchcraft room and a vampire room. Had like a 17th century vampire hunting kit, which was cool. But the first year that she had that museum, she had a room in the basement of that building, and that's how I got down there.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
Back before the old dilapidated jail was condos and a video game bar.
Right.
It was still an old dilapidated jail.
Right.
By the way, I've had experiences in the Bit Bar as well in that jail setting too. So
Have you really?
not huge ones, but like sometimes you put drinks down and they'll slide across the table. That happened to me once.
Imagine being a ghost and like a witch trials victim ghost and being stuck in Bit Bar. How annoying would that be? Just constant clanging of arcade machines.
You'd be entertained at least, I guess.
I'm sure you would. I have this great picture. It's maybe my favorite picture I've ever taken in Salem of Bit Bar on Halloween night in the back room where the pinball machines are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the pinball machines. Everyone that's on them is in costume. And
That's
my
great.
favorite one is Michael Myers, full Michael Myers regalia, jumpsuit, mask, everything. Big dude, like Michael Myers sized guy playing pinball. He's a foot and a half taller than everyone around him. It's just my favorite. It's the most Salem thing I've ever. It's so perfect.
That is a Salem. That is a Salem. Can only happen in Salem.
Right. So what's your draw? I think like if you had to give someone a log line that's saying like, "Hey, Ron, you go to Salem all the time. Why? What is it? What is it about the place?"
I get the feeling that and when you walk into Salem, you can't deny it. There's a feeling in that city that anything can happen at any time, and it wouldn't be that unusual. Like I think
Right.
we're there maybe are used to it I think because of the witch trials, and the city's had a pretty morose history outside of the witch trials as well. I think that general area has been stained with this energy that's just palpable when you walk down Essex Street, when you walk down Derby Street. Like you can feel it, and it gives you that feeling that, man, anything could happen tonight here in this town. It's one of those cities.
Do you feel that way outside of the Halloween season too? When you're there in the off season, do you have?
Yeah. The couple times I've been there in the off season, I have felt like that.
Yeah.
What's really cool, what you alluded to this before with your favorite thing, on November 1st, which I've never been able to experience because we stay off property and I'm rarely there on Halloween itself. But a really cool experience is just just walking the streets at like 11:30 midnight because they're completely empty most of the time.
Yeah.
That experience, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday in October.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something, it is hard maybe it does have to do with the history. Maybe it has to do with the transient nature of the place. I've talked to a witch friend of mine about it, and that's her theory. If she says that any of these places that have sort of a liminal energy, meaning that they're a place that people more often pass through than remain, it somehow creates some sort of like spiritual vector of strange energies that are divergent and confluent and all over the place. And so the sense that anything could happen, perhaps even permeates down into like a deeper than material plane where literally any spiritual manifestation could occur too.
Sure. And I'm sure that all the different forms of witchcraft that are being practiced there certainly have an effect on the general atmosphere of the city as well. From the people that I know there, I know there's at least 5 different branches of witchcraft being practiced there, and I'm sure there's a ton more than that. That's just the ones that I've known of over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, yeah. And then now you have
there's what, there's a dozen witch shops there, and I'm sure they each have their own branch of the religion that they practice.
Definitely. They each come from, well, now there's the Satanic Temple too, which you could say is not strictly religious, but definitely the layman would say that it's religious. I think they would see it as Satanism as some sort of religious thing. That branch of Satanism isn't, but to the outside perspective, yeah, it's like all of these different forms of spiritual practice present there, plus the Christianity is still very much alive in Salem.
Oh yeah.
Very much. They still protest on Halloween. They still do that whole thing. Do you think...
I've seen that's some of the theatrical Christianity, but I believe Salem, from what I've experienced, also has just some of the, hey, we're Christians, we're just good people, this is where we live.
Yeah. Especially recently, it seems like a pretty diverse spiritual community generally that's pretty accepting of most, expressions of religious.
Yeah, sure.
And cultural lifestyle as well. It seems pretty open.
Yeah, a lot of churches are evolving with what's happening culturally.
Yeah.
They'll still charge you $20 to park in their parking lot.
You got to make money.
which is, make some money. If you can do it, make some money, I guess.
Right. So at what point did you've got a podcast called the Salem 1692 podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about when that started and why it started and what it is.
Well, it's a podcast that covers the Salem Witch Trials chronologically. Like right now in the podcast, I'm in the middle of August 1692. We're actually I just released an episode a couple days ago. We're on the eve of the execution of John Proctor and John Willard, George Burroughs, Martha Carrier, in August of 1692. And the reason that I started the podcast was because I searched for a podcast about that. Like, I already know the history. I've been studying this 20 years or so. But I thought there would be something out there that would go through the history. And there has been seasons. Like, I know it's a really big podcast, and they did a season on the Salem Witch Trials, and they're real big into, like, we're going to interview these experts on Salem Witch Trials. Like, we're going to interview Marilyn K. Roach. We're going to interview Mary Beth Norton. I'm just going for a straight history lesson. If you want to know what actually happened during the witch trials, no propaganda, no one else's point of view. I'm going straight from the original documentation and then using some books that have been written about the Salem Witch Trials as like side information. And I'm also using the format of really digestible 15 to 20 minute episodes. So I'm not logging you down with an hour and a half episode. a heavy American history.
Right.
It's not like what we're doing right here. I'm not sharing stories. We're not having um, experiences. I'm just straight telling you what happened. Now, every once in a while, I can't help myself and I'll interject an opinion in there. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward as to what just happened. And it's based on a podcast called History According to Bob. And this guy was a college history professor and seems to know everything there is to know about history. And he would spit out little 15-minute podcasts. And then over the course of a few months, you would get the entire Civil War explained to you pretty well. And you would retain more of it because it was in such little doses. So that's why I'm doing that with the Salem 1692 podcast. Now, I'm not being able to put out as many on a regular schedule as I would like. I have to kind of pop them in to where I can. As I was writing that book, and I at one point was working 2 jobs, so gotta fit them in where I can. But if you've ever wanted to know what actually happened during the Salem Witch Trials, this is a good way to do it. And since they're only 15-20 minutes long, I mean, you can binge listen to them to get caught up really easily. I just put out episode 40.
Yeah.
So it's about maybe a total of 10 hours worth of material.
Right.
Most of them coming straight from the original documents. I got this bad boy right here, which
it is
all just copies of the original documentation.
Yeah.
What that book is. And I bought that from the Salem Witch Museum, by the way, which is another incredible resource for stuff that actually happened in 1692 in Salem.
Yeah. I would say it's the authoritative Salem Witch Trials history podcast to my mind. I don't know anybody.
I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that quote.
Use it. Go for it. Yeah, I would definitely, people watching and listening to this, check it out if you're interested in witch history, the witch trials history. No one is doing it more deeply or more nuanced or even really trying to do it that way. So,
and I started off with some things leading up to the witch trials. We didn't start off right with the witch trials.
Right.
Obviously, I started off with the Goodwin case in Boston because that was very heavily influential into the witch trials, and then the Putnams versus the Porters plays a big role in the witch trials. So we had to cover that real fast before we went into the witch trials. And the plan is, even when the Salem witch trials are over, the podcast isn't going to be over. I'm going to continue on with the history of Salem, because Salem's had a pretty fun history after the Salem witch trials. Plus, the after effects of the witch trials affected Salem. I mean, pretty much still to this day. And we'll work our way into how it became a tourist town and what it's like there today as well.
That's awesome, man. What is it about that period of time, do you think, for you that holds such fascination?
I think because it's such a honest time. We know we have the ability to look back upon it and see, for example, what happened during the witch trials, to see how it affected that colony in particular, see how it affected all of the colonies in particular after that. So we have all that. Now, what's happening now in America, we don't really know how it's going to affect history, and we won't know because we won't live long enough. Right. How people in the future are going to look back on this and see, was it really as tumultuous as they said when they were living it? Now we have tons of documentation via social media and things, but back then all they had was paper and a feather with some ink. Right. Luckily for us, a ton of documents have survived over 320 years. For the Salem witch trials in general, I've always been interested in early American history, just because of the formation of the country, and it's very intriguing to me that the people who founded the country were at the right place at the right time. And just to think, what if it had been other people
Right.
that weren't as intelligent or as patient in creating the country, would have had a whole different situation going on here. Maybe we don't have the democracy that we have today. Maybe we're living in some sort of, oligarchy where the transfer of power only happens violently instead.
Right.
I mean, we're one of very few countries where the transfer of power happens peacefully, from one president to the next. And so the whole step of our country, and also it's kind of fun because unlike Europe or Africa, where their history is literally thousands, if not millions of years old, um, ours is a few hundred years. So we can go back to, I can go to Salem, and we know where the meeting house was, and I can look at that area, and even though it's not there, you can take a picture, you can envision it. We can go to the Rebecca Nurse homestead and look at the Nurse family graveyard and be fairly sure somewhere in this area Rebecca Nurse is buried. We just don't know quite where, which would be an interesting study for people who have that kind of technology available to them to try to find where she's buried at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who Josh Gates is?
I don't think so.
Josh Gates is a host of like a paranormal slash adventure series where it's called Destination Unknown. It's on like Travel Channel, where he just goes and investigates mysteries around the world. Like he's the modern day Indiana Jones.
Okay.
And he was in Salem, like the first place he went to when he got out of his house was that's like a few weeks ago. He went to Salem. And I was just kind of wondering, like, what's he out there for? Like, be on the TV show, and that popped in my head. I'm like, maybe he's going to try to find out if Rebecca Nurse is actually buried in that graveyard.
That'd be interesting.
Was there, so
you could do the tunnels too. There's a series of I don't know if you've had a chance to read much about the tunnels under Salem or talk to many people, but there's a
I did do the tunnels, the Smugglers Run tunnels tour.
Oh, I did that one too.
Where you kind of look into the tunnels, but I've never been into them. I've read a little bit about them. I've never been.
There's a whole series of really strange events connected to the tunnels, and a lot of history there that's like oral history still.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be, I mean, I've thought for a while, for a few years, that those tunnels are really an opportunity for someone who has the resources and a team to, illuminate a whole chapter of Salem's history through their building, all the way really up until they shut them down post-prohibition. And they didn't even really shut them down. So you've got a few hundred years of smuggling going on, of bootlegging, of slave trades. I mean, you've got all kinds of stuff going on in those tunnels that we just don't know fully what's down there, what's even connected to. The tunnel map isn't complete. Like it's pretty wide open still. So that could be a cool
and that's one of the amazing things about Salem. When you think we can't possibly have uncovered anything else, this whole new world there that we don't even know what's down there.
No, we've got bits and pieces of it, but nobody's really done it yet. I don't think nobody's really put it together, and a lot of that's because the tunnel's connected to private property. They're connected to businesses. They open up in the basement of businesses, so it's hard to coordinate. I know Ron Kolek, the paranormal investigator, tried to do something with it, but he couldn't get too into it because business leaders were like, "Nah, you're not gonna go rummage around in our basement," So that's fascinating.
Yeah, there's always new stuff being uncovered. Like even when the first year I went in 2001, you're talking 310 years after the Salem Witch Trials. Like what else could possibly be uncovered? Well, that year, 2001, I believe it was on Halloween, they finally, acquitted the rest of the victims of the Salem Witch Trials by name.
Yeah.
Were never mentioned by name. I think there was 5. I know Susanna Martin was one for sure. And they were like, yeah, these people weren't witches. So by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we don't recognize them as such. And, basically restoring their name in 2001. And then here we are in 2017, they finally said, yeah, so we're pretty sure this is where these people were hung. Now there's a memorial out there at Proctor's Ledge behind a Walgreens. But
It
we
keeps happening.
were, maybe if that had been preserved, there wouldn't be a Walgreens there.
Right, right.
But things are still being uncovered, to this day. I mean, it's crazy.
So, as someone who is very much tapped in the Salem Witch Trials, do you think that they are adequately represented, or that history is adequately represented in Salem?
Well, the story of Salem and Danvers it kind of go together, and I said because Danvers used to be Salem Village, but Danvers had Richard Trask, and Salem didn't. So Richard
Right.
was very much into preserving all of that history, digging up the foundation of the parsonage, building the replica of the meeting house of the Rebecca Nurse homestead. And then Salem was very much of the mind that we want to forget that this happened. We don't want people to associate us with, I mean, for a while, obviously that's not the case today. We don't want people to associate us with this witchcraft, this badness that happened. So they, from what I understand, I mean, they pretty much went out of their way to destroy anything that had anything to do with the Salem Witch Trials. So when they decided maybe we need to embrace this, they did what they could. And I think, for it being 300 plus years ago, and this is partially due to the town of Salem and a lot to do with the people who love the history and went out of their way to research and went out of their way to cultivate that in Salem. I think it's probably about the best that it could be, other than people in the 1700s, saying this is an important historical location, we need to preserve this, which did not happen.
Right, right.
You have the Witch Trial Memorial, you have a bunch of museums that tell the stories and things, which I was thinking about this last night, actually, when because I started reading a new book about Salem. And I was like, people say that, it's exploitative, we're exploiting the victims of the witch trials by making this into like a tourist location. But I think the places that have to do with the actual witch trials aren't as exploitive. They're pretty reverent towards the victims of the witch trials, towards the people who were involved. And again, it's a terrible tragedy that these 20 plus people died in jail. People lost their lives, and how many other lives were ruined because of the witch trials. But then again, if they were just farmers who lived their life out and nothing ever happened to them, we wouldn't know their names.
Yeah, it's tricky.
We wouldn't know their stories.
It's tricky. The entire, well, in my perspective, you have to look at it from a few angles. Like, there's the historical angle, which is the one you're talking about. Is it, I don't know, does it violate something historically or in the way of accuracy to have these attractions or museums propping up history that's like outdated or just untrue, I went into the Salem Witch Museum actually not long ago just to revisit it. I've only actually done that thing like 4 times, oddly enough. You think I would have done a lot more, but I don't actually go in it that much. But I
go into the gift shop every year. They have a great gift shop.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I do the gift shop, but I don't actually do the exhibit. But I did it recently, and I was listening and watching it and just kind of struck by how much of that exhibit is a little outdated, not just in terms of like, the figurines, which were clearly made in the 70s, but the history is a little bit wrong.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of places like that in Salem. So you can look at it from that angle where it's like, is it violating history somehow to have it commercialized? But then there's also the spiritual or religious angle, which is like, is it, this was a big deal when Laurie Cabot was hot on the scene. She's still around, obviously, but she's not as big of an influence as she once was.
Mm.
She was hot on the scene, her and Christian Day and that whole group. The big thing was they were kind of adopting, the criticism was that they were adopting the 20 executed, to say that they had somehow died in the name of religious tolerance, and that they had died to, in a way to like uh, almost for contemporary witches, like that their death opened up a religious tolerance space that contemporary witches feel like they snug and fit into.
Mm.
And so they sort of like revere them as witches, quote unquote, even though they acknowledge that they weren't actual capital W witches. So there's that argument, is like, is the commercialization somehow a spiritual violation because we've turned a town that was, the story of the Salem Witch Trials is really the story of puritanical religious fanaticism and divergent worldviews colliding, and a series of, as you well know, a series of influences that were very real and present and dangerous, all coalescing into this one moment that was a storm that no one could seem to get out of. So to take all of that and like say, to put a witch's hat on it and throw candy corn on it
Mm.
seems disingenuous. And then finally, there's the whole thing about commercializing a tragedy at all, commercializing the death of all of these people, brutal, horrible deaths. In one case, you've got a 4-year-old girl or 4-year-old child who was put in jail and never recovered, really,
Mm-hmm.
totally mentally scarred, and lived a horrible life because of what happened. So real deep down atrocities that are turned into entertainment, basically, depending on where you go. And I'm kind of guilty of it too, to be honest. This audio drama I've got coming out tomorrow, some of my Salem Witch Trials videos, which are attempting to explore the life of the people caught up. Those are definitely narrativized, and there's definitely like an attempt to, move things around a little bit so it's more clearly communicated. So I don't know. I'm in this weird place where it's like, while I get all of that criticism, and I get that this kind of blatant commercialization and reframing of narratives to suit different ends for different people is ethically questionable. What I also, on the other side of the argument, I come back and I say, yeah, but if you want a Halloween town and if you want a witch city, you kind of have to do it,
That's the evolution of Salem. If you look at it from a historical perspective, even just from the 70s when the tourism first started with the Salem Witch Museum, as you were talking about before, which I believe their stance on their presentation is that point of view is now part of history.
Yeah, I mean
I get it. It's a little confusing because I don't say that right at the very beginning. But definitely over the years since the Salem Witch Museum, the Salem Witch History Museum, the Salem Wax Museum, the Salem Dungeon Museum, all these museums, since those have gone up, the overall point of view as to what happened, why it happened, has all changed, and they have not evolved with it. So I see what you're saying with the misnarratives sometimes, but it is interesting, even from the 70s, to see how this place has evolved into Halloween town, a haven for those who practice witchcraft, which is kind of weird that this is where alleged witches were murdered. So all of us who are witches, we're going to all converse onto this one,
right.
And then create this unique form of energy, which, yeah, it's a little. If you sit down and think about it, it is a little. I don't want to say shady. It's not shady. But uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
But then again, we have all of these. They say people live through Like, have you ever seen the movie Coco?
Yeah.
So, you go to the other world and tell people in the real world, forget about you. And then you go to some other place and just completely disappear out of existence. Well, I feel like we're keeping these people's spirits alive by telling their stories, by um, realizing, and it's a very important lesson that as a country, we play over and over and over again.
Yeah, we haven't learned it, I don't think.
It constantly happens with McCarthyism, with the Satanic Panic, with even with people of Middle Eastern descent after 2001, after 9/11. It was the same thing. So it's a different face on an old facade, but this is a lesson that needs to be taught. And I say several times in my podcast too, like, I'm not making this up, guys. This isn't a movie. I'm not telling a fictional story. These things, as crazy as it sounds, actually happen to real people, in the 17th century. I'm not, this isn't something that I've created in my head to entertain you.
Right. Right.
But it's a lesson that needs to be taught, and whether or not people learn it when they have their souvenir witch hat on, and they're drinking their super hocus pocus frappuccino that
Right.
got at one of the local coffee shops, and they're worried about their walking tour in about an hour, whether or not that actually sinks into them. We did the best we could by actually letting you know and telling you to learn it is each to each individual person is something that they have to do on their own. But it's a lesson that needs to be taught, and a history that needs to be um, taken care of. The history needs to be there.
Yeah. Is there anything you change about the let's say let's go back to like October of last year, pre-COVID era Salem, because we obviously have no idea what's going to happen in the wake of
Sure.
Halloween effectively being canceled. But pre-COVID era Salem, is there anything you would change about the Salem tourism slash attraction presentation? Is there anything that strikes you as like could be done better, or you just don't like?
Well, I wish they would weed out a couple of tours. A lot of them now. It's when I first got there, there was like five, maybe six total. Um, Now there's just so many of them. They just cover all. It's all the same thing for the most. I mean, aside from a few tours, I have my favorites. I'll list them in the book. Um, there's like five or six that are just interchangeable, and
Yeah.
it's kind of funny when you're not on a tour and you're just walking through like down what they call the haunted neighborhood. I don't know what the name of that street actually is.
I don't either.
Off the haunted neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's the Witch Trial Memorial, and there's like six different tours that have all converged onto the Witch Trial Memorial. That's where they all end up at. So they all have their security people, and they all have their microphones, and they're like dueling tours. Other than that, I wish there was something that went out to Danvers. I mean, I wish there was like if you could take a 3-hour definitive witch trial trolley, that hit all of the main spots in Salem, maybe a walking portion. Then you get on the trolley, you go out to Danvers and hit those locations out there. It's just about the history of the witch trials. Because now that Jim McAllister doesn't do tours anymore, I think he does it by like reservation, like you can book him or whatever. He doesn't have a nightly tour anymore. I don't believe, maybe the Salem Historical Tour Society has a tour. And I think it's in the daytime, but I don't believe there is. Aside from that one, there's not many tourists that just do Salem witch trial stuff.
Yeah.
They're just like, there was a ghost here. Oh yeah, that's a place where a person was pressed to death. The only time it's ever happened in American history.
Right.
Here is a arcade bar.
Right. Do you have any feelings about Peabody Essex Museum and sort of their, I would say, very distanced or lukewarm um, willingness to participate in anything having to do with the witch trials?
I Witch trials. we say this as they have all of the documents available for anyone
Right.
to
Right.
come and see, which means I have to get there before April. Like this is the only time in my life I'm gonna be able to see this. Uh, it's 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 such a catch 22 that the person the entity that owns most of the stuff related to the Salem Witch Trials is the one entity who doesn't want
I
to
know.
uh, to market that and make them available for people. Although from what I understand, the documents are very frail. They're over 300 years old. So
That's what they say. Yeah.
yeah, they have to be. Have you been there yet? Have you seen it yet?
No, I was gonna go last time I was in town, but it was already last time I was there was I guess a week and a half or so into October or week into October, something like that. It was early, but it was already swamped already. That's kind of why I went, because I wasn't sure. I was trying to follow, the Halloween updates, but it was
Mm-hmm.
hard to tell just how, because people post on Reddit and Facebook and stuff, but that's not reflective of reality. So I wanted to go and see what it was actually looking like. And yeah, man, there was lines out the door to everything, a bunch of people without masks, and I think that's when I kind of decided, like, oh, this isn't going to be
Sure.
good in 3 weeks. But the Peabody was slammed, so I was just like, I'll just come back in November or something.
Yeah, they sell out. It seems like every single day. I have the Salem app, and then you get the little notifications.
Yeah,
Luckily, I'll be there till April, so I'll hit it up hopefully in the spring before they
yeah,
put them away again forever. It's a little disheartening that they have control over so much of the Salem witch trial stuff, and they seem to not want to be part of the Salem tourism. They kind of distance themselves from the Halloween tourism and the witch trial tourism, which is kind of one and the same.
yeah.
Um, Although I think maybe they're coming around. They had the Monsters Alive thing a few years
Which
ago
is great. Yeah,
with the classic Universal Monster stuff, the Kirk Hammett
Kirk
collection.
Hammett. Yeah,
And then this year they're doing they actually are showing the actual documents from the Salem witch trials.
yeah. I
Maybe
mean,
maybe somebody got in power in there and was like, hey, we have this stuff. Let's make some money off of it and let's.
they're really the only ones who could stop it. I mean, I bring this point up a lot to people who, my mom and sister both have come from Tennessee now to do Halloween in Salem with me, and they both had similar feelings, which was like, why are there so many museums? This doesn't make sense. Like, why shouldn't there just be one? And my response is like, well, there is one. They're just deciding not to be the one.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
so Pem is really, to my mind, the only one who could, if we want to say that the attraction or Salem Witch Trials attraction market in Salem is somewhat diluted by nonsense, if we wanted to go that far, um, you would then say that the only people who could probably clean that nonsense up would be Pem. And the way that they would do that is just by having a permanent display.
Do you think it would clean it up though?
I think it might. I think
Like, is the Salem Witch History Museum going to go out of business if the Peabody Essex Museum has a permanent Salem Witch Trials
I
attraction?
think I don't know that they go out of business, but I think it's a lot harder to, there's two things. Donna, who works at Salem State and does the Streets of Salem blog, which I'm
Mm-hmm,
sure you've come across,
mm-hmm.
she has a really interesting point. She's one of my favorite Salem thinkers. I adore her and her blog. She has a really interesting point about the word museum, which is like, not every town allows this kind of thing.
Yeah,
Where
absolutely.
so the fact that you have all of these museums in the first place is problematic. And if Pem, I guess my point is that if Pem wanted to put up something permanent and wanted to lean into, we're going to take over this space because we're really the only ones who can, and say, we can present this as accurately as anyone else can, more accurately than anyone else can, and we can evolve with the narrative as the narrative becomes more clear in a way that these private institutions can't necessarily, which would be true, I think. Um,
No,
and then they,
that's absolutely true. Yeah.
yeah, and then they say, okay, now the second step is we have to make it clear that we're historically authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And in so doing, that distinguishes them from places that wouldn't be. I know it's a lot of ifs, but I don't think it's outside the realm of even like remote possibility that if they wanted to they could become the Salem Witch Trials actual history presentation, which I think would leave really only the thematic presentation to the places who do it very, very well, which in my mind are places like the Salem Witch Museum
Mhm.
or the Witch Dungeon Museum. Um, Places where the history isn't really what you're going for. I mean, it's nice, but the thematic nature of it is, my problem with these attractions isn't that they're there necessarily. It's that it's like, if you're gonna be leaning on the thematic nature of what you're doing, then lean hard and make it good. Make go all in. Say this is narrativized. Say we're playing with history. Say we're presenting a Salem Witch Trials experience for you. We're not trying to present history as it actually was necessarily. Our primary focus is to give you an experience that illuminates your understanding of the Salem Witch Trials in a more contextual way than purely factual. Um, but a lot of these places don't do that either. It's like clearly just profiteering, which
Yeah, the Salem Witch History Tourist Trap doesn't have quite the ring to it.
right. Although I would respect it, honestly, it'd be more honest.
uh, along those same lines, I mean, like you mentioned, the Salem Witch Museum has done an amazing job of trying to be that, but they just don't have the physical attributes to do that. Like they don't
Yeah,
have the documentation.
they don't have the documentation. They don't have the staff. They don't have, it's a
They don't
big
have they
undertaking.
probably, I mean, I don't know their resources, but they probably don't have the resources that the Peabody Essex Museum has.
Oh God, no.
And even if the Peabody Essex Museum were to do that, and someone were to get into power there that were to be big on, hey, we're going to be the definitive Salem witch trial history, keepers of the Salem witch trial history. We have all the documentation. We own most of the land around this area. We can do a really good job of it. I don't think that it would be, because they can't tell every story, and
Sure.
there are so many stories involved with the Salem witch trials that there would still be room for the Salem Witch Museum, the Salem dungeon, witch dungeon,
Yeah.
uh, because they're not going to do a recreation of the dungeon area and what it was like. So there'd be a need for that. And the presentation would have to change. And from being there for 20 years, I can tell you that the presentation in these museums have not changed in
No,
20.
it hasn't.
Nothing's changed. It's still the same. The mannequins, the tour guides have changed. The
Right.
people you through.
Right.
That's about it. So
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I want it to happen. It just seems obvious to me that if we're concerned with adequate representation of the history, not full comprehensive representation, because as you say, that would be almost impossible. You would need like
mhm,
a whole
mhm.
theme park devoted to the history in order to pull that off. But if we're concerned with the adequate representation of the whatever our confines of history are, I don't know who else could do it. And right now, no one really is doing it because they can't. It's PIM. So I don't know. I go back and forth on that though, man. If I'm honest, I have this debate with myself probably 20 times a year, as I'm sure you have similar debates with yourself, where it's like sometimes I'm in Salem and I'm walking around and I'm just so sick of it. I'm so sick of all this, like, I'm so, the thing that drew me there in the first place has morphed into the thing that I'm like, God, why, that just needs to go away. That needs to be replaced by something with more weight to it or something like that. But then sometimes I'm in Salem and I'm like, oh, I just want to go in there and have a good time, so
Sure.
yeah.
Um, and that's part of the reason why I wrote the book. Because in the book I declare myself Salem's #1 tourist, because I'm coming from 1,000 miles every year. I've gotten to the point where I know people who live there. I know shop owners there, and one of the reasons that I wrote the book was because there are tourist traps at this. you know at least I like the Salem Witch History Museum. It's not the greatest thing ever, uh, but you're going to get some stories in relation to the Salem witchcraft trial. It's going to be presented in a different way. than anybody else presents it. But there are just some locations there, and I don't want to mention any by name. I don't want to like slander anyone.
Sure.
That just aren't. Even if you've never been there, it's just not worth. It's not worth going.
Yeah.
And that Lizzie Borden Museum that I spoke about earlier was one of those places. So I just wanted to have a reference guide for someone who maybe it's their first time in Salem. They're going to be there for 2 days. Don't waste your money on this. This is what you need to do.
Because it's hard to tell.
And Salem's become a big enough tourist attraction because I've seen it grow for 20 years, and I'm sure it grew immensely, from the 80s when it started to 2001 as well. It's much, much bigger than it was in 2001. I felt like there's so many resources available now, but there's not this one definitive like book that you can pick up and be like, okay, so this is the kind of food that they serve at the red sandwich shop.
Right.
Is this a place that I want to look into? This is what they cover on this tour. Is this a tour that I want? There's barkers everywhere in Salem. Take our tour. We're going to show you the most haunted locations in Salem. Then you take the tour and you're like, I could have just done that.
Right.
Like, give me much information. So like any other tourist town, there's going to be stuff that's actually really creative and takes advantage of the town's history or takes advantage of the area. And there's going to be stuff that's just thrown together to make a buck.
Right. Yeah.
This is trying to like lure you away from the stuff that's just trying to get a buck out of you. At the same time, I've overheard at this point, like when I go to Salem, people think that I'm a resident. So they ask me all these, hey, do you know that? Of course, I know where everything's at. So it's not a big deal. I can tell them where things are at. But I've overheard conversations where people are talking about, oh, well, this, for example, there's a place called Gallows Hill Theater. Does that have anything to do with the witch trials? And I hear those conversations and I want to be like, no, but it's super great. You should go anyway. But it really have much to do with the witch trials, if that's what you're looking for.
Right. So let's do, I apologize for the background noise here. They just showed up to start cutting my grass. Apologies, listeners. You're going to hear people cutting grass in October because apparently that's a thing. So let's close this out. I think this will be fun. Let's do some rapid fire of Salem's #1 tourist. Rapid fire destinations, things to check out, restaurants, however you want to interpret it, just places to go in Salem for a variety of groups. All right. So first off, people who are there for Halloween lovers, your Hocus Pocus fans.
Gallows Hill Theater and Lost Museum.
Great. History lovers.
Salem Witch Museum.
That's a good one. Paranormal people.
Although I would say for history lovers, create your own tour.
Yeah. Well, what if we do two? What if we say Salem history lovers and witch trials history lovers?
Witch trials history lovers, definitely the Salem Witch Trials. History lovers, I would suggest doing the Hocus Pocus Tours has a cell phone guided tour now. I would suggest that.
Oh yeah, good idea. Witches, actual witches, Wiccans, Western esotericists.
If you're a witchy type person and you get to say, you can't find a place to go to, but as far as witch museums go or witch shops go, I'd probably start with Hex.
Yeah. The people who do Hex started the new one too. Pentacle or Pentagram.
Oh, Pentagram is an offshoot of Hex and Omen?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I didn't know that was a Christian and Brian thing.
It's not Christian and Brian. It's two other Hex people. God, what are their names? I'll have to look into it.
Oh, the Hex people are always opening up their new locations. Like the Black Cauldron, Cauldron Black is a Hex person as well.
Right. Yeah.
So
no, it's not Christian and Brian.
But you can't go wrong with any of the witch shops there. But my are Hex and Coven's Cottage is really a newer one that's really good too.
I like Coven's Cottage because they don't like take pictures. I love that. I love that they preserve this air of mystery, that they don't want you to take pictures of the
New England Magic's like that too.
Oh yeah, that's true.
They say it messes with the energy, which makes sense.
Right, makes sense to me. How about old folks, retirees?
Trolley tour.
Yeah.
Salem is very, very hard on the feet, and
That's
I would
true.
Seven Gables.
Oh yeah, Gables is a good one.
Historical landmark.
Yeah, they probably won't be able to get up the hidden passage though. Unfortunately.
Well, they have the chicken exit. We just wait down.
That's true.
So
that's true. What about
the hidden patches?
or...
The hidden passage is really cool.
It is really cool. If you get a chance to do it, you should definitely do it. What about couples, newlyweds, people there on their honeymoon, that sort of thing?
If you're there on your honeymoon, you're probably of the spooky variety. So I'm going to say that Count Orlok's Nightmare Gallery is a definite must for you. And I would say if you're on your honeymoon, if you can, you're not there in October, but you probably are if you're that kind of person. If you can book it, then definitely get the Hawthorne.
Oh yeah. Have you seen the new Pennywise at Orlok's yet?
Yes, I have.
Okay, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I've had James Lurgio, the writer of Count Orlok's, on my horror movie podcast a few times. He's a really fun guest.
What is your horror movie podcast, just so the listeners can check it out?
It's called The Resurrection of Zombie 7 podcast. And it began years ago. We were on our ninth year. We started off as a franchise horror podcast, like we would do every movie of a franchise in order. And then we've cut back. We've cut back, and now we do like one show a month, a couple of shows that have a running theme between them. For October, we're doing one a week, but we don't usually just a Halloween thing.
What do you got coming up on that show?
So we had, for October of 2020, we have a new show every Saturday, which is a movie that takes place on Halloween night.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah, so we've done like Sleepy Hollow, and we did a really bad 80s movie called Jacko. At the time of this recording, the movie that comes out tomorrow is an 80s, like, not quite a classic, but kind of well known in the horror universe, called Trick or Treat. Not Trick or Treat, starring who played Skippy from Family Ties.
Okay.
Guest appearances from Ozzy Osbourne and Gene Simmons.
Nice.
It's all about a kid getting possessed because he played his record backwards.
Oh my God. Hate when that happens.
Yeah. Salem, it could happen in Salem. It would happen in Salem. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Ron. Where can people find out more about you? Where can people get the book? What social media profiles are you on?
So I'm on a Facebook. You can hit Discover Salem on Facebook. That's all me. I'm on Twitter at Salem Discover, because when I went to Twitter to try to create a profile for Discover Salem, at Discover Salem was already taken. Little did I know that it was taken by me 8 years ago, until one of my friends pointed it out to me, and I was like, oh, well, I already have this other one at Salem Discover. So those are the two places that you can find me on social media. As far as websites and podcasts and things, the Salem 1692 podcast and the Resurrection of Zombie 7 podcast should be able to be found anywhere you catch podcasts. The Salem 1692 podcast can be found on ihatestuff.net. I tend to be a pretty harsh critic when it comes to movies, thus the name I Hate Stuff. I Hate Stuff, a horror-tinged pop culture website. I'll post articles there about random pop culture stuff, usually dealing with horror, but not always dealing with the horror genre. I don't know if you can tell, I tend to like horror movies.
I do see. What am I seeing back there? I'm seeing a guy from Scream. I'm seeing Jason.
Yeah, Scream. I got all the people who play Jason's autographs at various conventions.
Oh, wow.
This is my Stephen King bookshelf. So, and then the Resurrection of Zombie 7, if you're into horror movies, is on zombie7.com.
Awesome.
It's available on Amazon. Literally, you type Discover Salem into a Google search bar. I think it's like the fourth the fourth thing that gets hit. So $12 for the paperback, $8 for the ebook. And the plan is to, like, for example, if you have your favorite guidebook for Disney World, that would get updated every year. So the plan is to update the book every year, because Salem changes constantly, and this book will be obsolete within 2 or 3 years. Like, there are already things that have been added to Salem since I've published the book. So I'll have to add those things next year.
Yeah. Well, I highly recommend it. Anyone who is thinking about coming to Salem, even if you're not sure when you're going, because things are a little strange right now with the pandemic, I would say go ahead and get it if you know you want to go at some point, because it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good proxy.
Yeah.
I think it's a good proxy for not going. Like, you can at least see what's there and what you'd like to hit up, and there's some like touring plans in there, like we just the little rapid fire thing that we just did, and a lot of little sections like, where can you find Nathaniel Hawthorne in Salem? Here are some locations.
Right. Well, cool. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man. This was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, you stuck with us through the entire episode. Thank you for checking out this episode of the Salem Witch podcast. Ron Martin is a fascinating dude, is he not? A really, really cool guy. Check out all of his work in the description. Please do go support him. He is, like me, a small content creator just doing it for the love of the game. And those kinds of people need all the support they can get. Trust me, I know. Hey, there's a new YouTube channel. If you go to the To Salem YouTube channel, or you could just go search for it in the search box. I don't know why it was hard to think of the word box, but it was. It's called Salem Witch Clips, and that's me. And basically what I've done is I've set up another channel filled with clips from the Salem Witch podcast, because these conversations tend to be like an hour to 2 hours long. I know not everybody has time for that. So if you just want to see little itty bitty clips of the people that you hear on this podcast, or you really want to listen to a specific part of podcast or whatever, go over there, check out Salem Witch Clips. Go ahead and subscribe to that. I'm not going to be doing segments on the podcast if you're listening. So also, if you just want to check out specific little segments from episodes, that's the best place. And I think it's probably going to be the only place to get that experience. Salem Witch Clips on YouTube. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. We got a lot of really cool stuff coming up. Next time on the show, we have Mr. Travis McHenry. Travis McHenry. He made this deck right here, this tarot deck. This is called the Occult Tarot. If you're listening, just go Google Occult Tarot and look it up. Very cool tarot deck. He's made many other tarot decks, but that is not all that he does. He is also an author, a writer, a director, an actor, a former Navy intelligence officer, a CEO, and the ruler of his own country. Yes, you heard that correctly. I did not make that up. You'll have to tune in to check out what that is all about. Please do subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on, rate, review, share, increase engagement for maximum profit. Stay weird, witches. See you next time.